Ed, it's very nice to be here in your retreat here in the mountains in California. What a beautiful place. Um, um, Thank you so much for having
Well,
us
David,
here.
it's my pleasure to have you here. I've heard so much about you. You're a mover and shaker for sure. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let's have at it. Huh?
Okay. So I think we have a lot in common. But let's start exposing some things through what we're talking about. Let's say there is a small group of people that are in a position to be paid interest on essentially all the debt, the money created in the world. And this is a concentrated group of people that are in that position. And all of this debt-based money that it has been they have created this essentially out of nothing, out of thin air. Is that essentially the situation we're in?
I think that's a pretty good summary of it. All the central banks of the world create the money of the world, and they do participate in every transaction. Every time somebody buys a package of bubble gum, there's a little bell that rings somewhere in the central bank cash register, and they get a little piece of the action. So yeah, they are in the middle of just about every productive exchange in the world that produces a service or a product, and that's a lot.
But this also the scale of what they're receiving in interest payments on something that was created out of nothing,
yes,
would confer an incredible and awesome power on these people.
Well, it's when I was trying to figure out a way of describing that in the early days, I came up with the idea of imagine a river of gold flowing constantly in one direction. A river of gold so wide that you cannot even think across it, much less see across it.
Yes.
And then you're probably getting close to what we're talking about.
Yes.
Because it's global and it's cumulative and it's continuous, and not every transaction is a package of bubble gum. Many of those transactions are humongous purchases and construction projects and so forth that involve hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. And wars, of course, create the necessary destruction that require reconstruction, and that's very much a part of it. You add all of that together, and it is a river of gold. And it comes from the little man in little pieces, and it's aggregated, and the tributaries gather together into the central banks. And as you mentioned, those central banks are controlled by a relatively small number of people. Yeah. So it's further aggregated, and where it winds up, we can only imagine. But I think an important part of that understanding is that these people don't use that river of gold entirely for their own pleasures or aggrandizement or anything. They use most of it, they spend most of it in the acquisition of control and power over the world. They use that money. It's not just profit to them. To them, it's a business expense, so to speak, because the real goal is not just to make more money. They've got all the money they can possibly spend. Yes. The real goal today, I believe, is to control every human being on the planet, and that's where that river of gold is going.
And the scale of the resource they have is beyond certainly any cash flow resource from any industry.
Oh,
really.
Well beyond that.
Because it is essentially all human activity is going to make these payments into this control structure.
Mm-hmm. That's it. It's so simple once you understand it, but it's so large and seems so bizarre to the average person that they can't imagine it, or they think it must be imaginary. It can't be, nothing like that. We certainly know about it. If something that big were in the room, we would know about it, right? Yes. How large does the elephant have to be? before you can see it, and the answer is it has to be bigger than the room, and then you don't see it.
Yes.
You're in it instead of seeing it.
Yes. So is it fair to say that the governments do not control this resource? It's the other way around.
Yes. It didn't start out that way, but that's always, you could predict that's the way it would be, because governments need money, and the only way they can get it is to tax their subjects, which is unpopular. And in today's world, governments must try very hard to be popular governments. Otherwise, they tend to be replaced by opposition forces that can pretend to be popular governments and benevolent governments. So they don't like the tax structure so much, but they love the fiat money structure, the devaluation of the purchasing power of the existing national currencies, because that's a hidden tax that goes directly to them, and not one person in 1,000 out there in the street understands how that works. So there's no animosity or anger on the public part, because they don't understand that they're being plundered. So it's their favorite method of paying for everything.
Yes.
And they have no limit.
Yes.
If it weren't for this skimming off the surface of every transaction and going into an element of society that has had no significant role in producing anything constructive except just skimming off all these little bits and dabs, a piece of the action, so to speak. If all of that was left behind to filter into the society itself, into the goods and services and the standard of living of the average person, I can imagine we would be living in a utopia right now of material convenience and wealth, and poverty would be almost a word you have to look up in the dictionary, because I think it would be eliminated. The natural instinct of human beings to be charitable would be so freely able to exercise itself. You've got all this surplus. If you see somebody who's in need, you'd certainly want to help them. You have plenty of your own, and only people who have more than they need can help those that have less than they need. So the object to help those who have less than they need is to get more people on the other side who have more than they need. So by helping them, you're indirectly helping even the guy on the bottom end of the scale. Most people don't see that. They think that you got to take from those that have and give it to those that don't have. And that's, of course, just a formula for failure. So I think if this were not skimmed off of all of these transactions, you're right, it would be a tremendous benefit that we can't even imagine. Life, I think, would be so much more affluent than it is now. No, some people might argue that maybe that would be a bad thing, because maybe we would become even more materialistic than we are. I don't see it that way. I think that some of the most genuine, spiritual, charitable, intellectual people that I know are very wealthy, but they don't use their wealth in that fashion to just get more wealth and have a bigger house and maybe a bigger yacht or something like that. They actually do a lot of good. They spend their money to help others in need. Mm-hmm. Or they'll pursue an education that enhances their understanding. Maybe they'll invent something because of their ability to take time to research and invent. I don't think that would necessarily boomerang. I think that's a question of personal capabilities and tendencies. I think that bad people will be bad people whether they're rich or poor, and good people will be good people whether they're rich or poor. That's my personal bias. I hope I'm right on that, but I think it would tend to be that way.
So there's a potential for benevolent use of the resource, but it actually seems to cause harm and deprivation. Is that an unfair thing to say?
No, I think it's a self-evident truth. You can see it. But the question remains, well, why is it that way? I feel that it's because the system that has evolved, the one under which we now live, has been twisted so badly that only those of this temperament are able to climb to the top. if it were a sort of a laissez-faire environment and you acquired success and authority because of your ability to produce goods and services or make life easier and better for people, the people that have those instincts would rise to the top. But the system we have now is basically based on fraud and myth, deception, legalized plunder, control over human beings, just for the sheer power of controlling them. None of those none of those results are the product of proper motivation, and they attract only people who are capable of playing the dirty game to rise to the top. So I think that's basic, could be a major part of that. I don't think it has to be that way. It's not just because everybody who is able to rise to the top is necessarily bad, but when the method by which you rise to the top is bad,
Yes.
then that filters out the good people, and only the bad ones will follow that ladder.
Is it somehow different or more extreme than it has been at other times in your life?
It's definitely different. Even the change is so drastic in my life. In one single lifetime, I can see it, and certainly somebody who would be reading about it in a history book or something would see that it was quite drastic. And again, I think it's because of the social acceptance of the system itself. What people are convinced is normal or correct or good or bad has been changed through a process that I could only call psychological warfare. And societies have changed. The cultures have changed. The values have changed. The mores are different than when I arrived on this planet. And that's not necessarily to say that everything that was existing at that time was excellent, because that would not be true. But they were certainly at a higher level, I think, of ethics than they are now. Now people rise to success, let's say in the corporate world, for example, not because of their ability to produce goods or services at a higher quality and a lower cost than their competitors, but because they have political influence and they bribe the politicians to pass laws to hinder their competition. So success now is awarded to those who play the dirty game instead of those who play the honorable game. So naturally, who's rising to the top but the dirty game players? So again, it goes back to the system, but that didn't just happen. There were and are a group of people that really want to play the dirty game. It's not just it happened and then they took advantage of it. They do want to change it in that direction and have succeeded in doing so.
Yes.
Now this is a harder question to answer to me. Why would they do that? And I don't know the answer to that. Maybe it's just that there's a certain difference from one group of people to another. I don't know.
So we put unlimited funding behind them.
Well, we put unlimited funding behind them because they make promises to us, and we're stupid enough to believe their promises, that the unlimited problems of the world can only be resolved by unlimited funding in their hands.
Yes.
And we figure, well, how else are you going to solve these problems? So we fall for the lie, and so we believe that because they say they want to help us, we think they mean it. And so we give them the money, the unlimited funding and power that they ask for.
So let's just say that was a mistake. What could be done about that?
You have touched on a very central issue that's seldom discussed. I've observed it's seldom discussed, and when I try to bring it up, sometimes I'm amazed at how much disinterest there is in the topic.
Yeah.
Because, well, I'll jump ahead, because the answer to the question really is quite mysterious. Well, what is that problem? It's let me tell you a little bit about my journey on all this. When I first became aware of these things, which was the year was 1960. Of course, I knew nothing about world events, had no interest prior to that, and so forth. So I'm starting with a clean slate. But all of a sudden, I see that things are not going well. And I'm beginning to realize what you just said, that there are people who are making decisions on my behalf and our behalf who I think they might not be telling me the truth, because they always seem to fail in their promises, and what comes out the other end results in the problem being worse and them becoming more powerful and more wealthy. You know, there was a trend there, and I could see that, but that's all I had to go on. And so for a long time, in the years from 1960 till about probably 80s, I was following the mantra of so many others who were on that same path, that the problem was power. And of course, Lord Acton's quote, famous quote, was famous among us too, with power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it's true. And so if you don't probe any further, you think, oh, we found the problem. It's power. The solution, therefore, is the elimination of power. Unfortunately, that is not a possible solution. The answer is, who is going to hold the power? And are there going to be any limitations on that power? And what could those limitations be, except other power? Well, those are issues that are very difficult to answer. Who can you trust when your instinct tells you you really can't or shouldn't, not can't, but shouldn't trust anyone in issues of this magnitude? Because all you have to do is make one mistake. You know, do you trust that engine on your airplane, or do you maintain it and look at it every time you take off? You don't trust anything that involves such precious things as your life and your liberty. And yet we're taught that you must trust, you know, as though it was some kind of an automatic virtue. Well, I didn't understand any of this at the time. And so I was part of the minions out there preaching the solution as, well, we must do what we can to eliminate power, to whittle it down, to get it down. And because as long as there's power out there, we're going to be in trouble. And the idea that I might actually seek power, political power, economic power over others, is unthinkable, because Lord Acton speaks to me again. So I reject power. I was preaching that. We ourselves must not seek power, was my answer. And we must discourage others from doing so. And then one morning, David, I was apparently thinking about this subconsciously in my dreams or something, because I woke up just as the sun was beginning to cast a little light into the sky. I remember looking out the window, and as I came into consciousness, I sat up in the bed. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I said, oh, I get it. We lose. And that idea, we lose because we have no power. You cannot, I realized you cannot overcome power without equal or superior power. And as long as we remain passive and endorse the idea that we must not have any power, we lose. Now, that leaves open the question, is there no way to win? Because how do we prevent ourselves from being subverted by the power if we were to achieve the power? And I've suddenly realized that the analogy was like having guns, gun control. Now, the argument against guns is that guns are dangerous. People get killed accidentally with guns. Crimes are committed with guns. Little children die from gun wounds. Guns, well, the only thing more dangerous than having guns is not having guns. Because then you cannot defend yourself against those who do have the guns. Wow, what a thought, you know. That means we have to figure out some way to safely handle guns so that guns can only be used for evil purposes, not accidentally, but by conscious design. But the people with guns who are not evil people will be able to, more than able to handle those few that are going to use guns for illegal or improper purposes. It's a question of balance or overriding one side over versus the other. And I realized that thing, and I went back and I started to reread all of those lessons of history. And I remember what I had learned when I studied Lenin. I read all the collected works of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. I used to hang out at the communist bookstore and read their books and participate in their group sessions, their recruiting sessions, really. As I read all their literature, I read, Marx's Das Kapital and Communist Manifesto, and I read Lenin. I read, well, I go on. That's another story. I discovered in reading all of those things that they were all the same, basically, same basic arguments. And Lenin was very instructive to me. I'm really going to answer your question, believe it or not. I think this might be helpful to other people who are struggling with this very transition I had to go through. Lenin was very prolific in writing. His collected works are like this, and boring stuff, because he says the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And the basic message he delivered is something like this. Comrades, it makes no difference what you think, or what you say, or how good a debater you are. None of that makes any difference. The only thing that really counts is to come to power.
Yes.
Once we come to power, we can, if anybody disagrees with us, we can shoot them.
Yes. So the issue, I believe, is concentration of power rather than distributed power.
Well, I would go one step further than that. I'll come back. Let me come back to that, if I may, because I'll just say, yes, it's distribution, but it's something else involving, and that's limitation. Limitation for what purpose? Very few people talk about that. Okay, let's talk about it. I'll put this other thing aside, because this perhaps is even more important. You and I were speaking earlier about the issue of what is the proper regard for property. Why would we want to defend property and so forth? My answer to that question was not all property, some property, and define the difference between the essential property and the convenience property. And the essential property is what it's worth fighting for. If necessary, you fight for your life and for your liberty. If somebody's trying to kill you or enslave you, you have every right, in most people's minds at least, to use force against them, unlimited force, to preserve your life and your liberty. And so therefore, you can delegate that authority to use force against another person. You can delegate that to the state, but only for those two purposes. It's not distributing it to the county level or the national level or so forth. It's limiting it to its purpose for which that authority is issued, in the defense of life and liberty,
yes.
Period, and put the walls on
Yes.
that. So that is the answer. It must, whatever the solution is, must involve the understanding that the use of coercion in the state must be limited to the defense of life and liberty, and nothing more. The rest is all voluntary. And not that you couldn't do things voluntarily. You could still build roads and have the state build roads if everybody agreed to it and wanted to donate to it and so forth, or put a toll booth on or something like that. But you don't go out and send a policeman to the door and say, you didn't pay your taxes for that toll road, and we're going to put you in prison because of it. All right, so that's it. I agree with you. It's distribution of power, but also the selection of what it's used for. And that's the missing thing right there. People tend to think, well, these bad people in office, if we just replace them with good people, we'll still have the same power to do whatever we want to do, the same ability to tax for anything we want to. Whatever we think is good, we'll be able to tax people for it. There's the mistake right there.
Well, but if you have a resource in society or resource of humanity, and if there is a mechanism to capture that resource and to direct it by a small group of people, that's one model. Another model is that this resource of humanity is distributed, and it can be used by many autonomous agencies, individual agencies, groups of people, and it can be used for good or ill.
Well,
The big difference is if it's distributed and someone is using it for ill, they will bear the consequences of that, and the people that are involved with them. The problem is when all that resource is concentrated and there is a potential for it to be used for ill.
Yes, that's the problem you mentioned. Now that it's here, what do we do about it? We have to
yes.
dismantle it.
Yes.
Now we got a special problem. It's not just preventing it from happening. We've got to dismantle it, and it has already happened.
Yes.
They already have the guns and the chemical weapons and the controls and everything, and
the banking power.
They got it all.
Which
So how do we overcome that without equal and opposite power? And
yes,
that's the critical thing.
This
right
is
there.
the thing that people can't. This is really what I think we need to urgently talk about. Is we're all suffering from Stockholm syndrome, which is that there's nothing we can do about it, so we'll just go along with it and support the system, however bad it is. But we're reaching a point where I think we can't do that any longer. And so it's very difficult to imagine how it can be changed peacefully and legally. But we must imagine how that could be done, how simply it could be done. I think we're kind of trapped in this mindset that it can't be done. We can't even talk about it. So I know, you were the first person, one of the first people to put forward a case for dissolving the Federal Reserve System, for reversing the Federal Reserve Act. Could that actually be done?
Well, there's the crux of it right there. Yes, it can be done, but not without power. You've already have to have the political power over Congress, for example.
You would have to have Congress.
Yeah.
You would need an act of Congress.
And that means you have to have power. You're not going to get congressmen to do what you want unless you've got the power to force them to do what you want.
Yes.
You've got to have the votes. You've got to control the political parties,
yes.
the media, and so forth.
Yes.
Or it's not going to happen.
Well,
and that's the power I'm talking about.
Yes.
We have to have power.
Yes.
In fact, when I created the Freedom Force International Organization, I chose to have a slogan for it, a motto, and I thought let's make it good, and so I came up with an expression. We had to convert it into Latin to make it sound kind of historic. Let's see if I can remember the Latin now. It's impotentes defendere libertatem non possunt, which translated is those without power cannot defend freedom. And that's what we're talking about. We cannot get Congress to abolish the Federal Reserve System until we have sufficient power of some kind to force Congress to do that.
Of course, it begins in one's own mind.
Yeah, starts with the individual.
And
that's right.
It starts with the individual. And if we really are entering a point in time where there's no alternative, but people have to wake up and pay attention to what is happening. And so this is happening increasingly at the individual level. I would like to think that this can begin at the local level. It doesn't start from the top.
Absolutely
because the
not.
federal level
You're
is
right.
controlled.
Absolutely true. Yeah.
The EU level, the EU system is completely unaccountable. It has to begin at changing things on a local level, really. It's not just a matter of talking about it. It's actually beginning to change things. And one wonderful thing we have to work with is the states, the state level in the United
And we're
States.
pretty fortunate. And that's
Yeah.
hard enough, but at least it's better than the national concept. Yes. Well, you're exactly, we're on the same track for sure. That's the reason, the answer to your question really, there is an answer. And part of it is we have to start at the local level and build popular support for what we want to do. And that'll give us the political voting power and the pressure that needs to be exerted against these Congress people.
Yes.
Who suddenly realize that no matter how much money they get in donations, if the will of the people out there is not going to support them, they're out.
Yes.
And that's political power, and it comes from the ground up, as you just suggested.
Yes.
So that's a key element of where we must begin our fight.
Yes.
Not at the national level or international, but at the ground level, forming committees or groups. We call them campuses. At the Red Pill University, these are campuses, we call them that. These are the people who are totally aware and dedicated and willing to get out there, like the counterpart on the other side that make all the noise and they got organizations, Of course, they're well funded. George Soros spends a lot of money with Black Lives Matter and Antifa and things like that. But those are powerful groups that bring about political pressure against Congress and the Senate. And that's where it all begins. We've got to have groups out there like that who are willing to stand up and be noisy. Now, I'm not advocating to go burn things down or destroy things, but you've got to be there on the spot and visible and very adamant as to what your position is.
Yes.
And it starts there.
Okay. Well, this is very important because it's happening.
It's happening, yeah.
So as I understand it, legislators at the state level, there's not a lot of money or glory in that. So these people are regular people. I think you'd have to say they believe in what they're doing because there's no glory in it. There's I guess I'm not sure that they're paid much of anything for doing it.
Very little in most cases, yeah.
So, and they have no staff. They have no support. They have to work a job to actually support their families while they're doing this. So they're...
That's ideal, by the way, in my view. That's perfect.
Yes, so I think they're much different than the people in Congress and certainly the Senate, the people at that level. So we have the potential of working with real people that are doing things for the right reason, but they have to see and understand what they're facing. But things can begin to change at the state level. So I want to tell you about what is happening now and talk about it a little bit. I've done work on these changes to property rights around securities, think stocks and bonds, and the subversion of these property rights, so that in insolvency, failures of financial institutions, people can lose their investment property, including pension funds, it will be quite pervasive. These assets can be taken even though people had borrowed no money against those assets. Someone else, some other entity, has used their property and encumbered it. And so the system is set up this way. And people are starting to become aware of this. As we've talked, property is absolutely fundamental to humanity, and even beyond humanity into mammals and birds, in terms of being able to reproduce, being able to have a home.
The territorial imperative is universal.
Yes.
It's ours, it's mine, and so forth. And the family has a lot of that built into it.
Yes. So if property is attacked, the ability to to have property, it really is fundamental to attack on the human person, our life, our ability to reproduce. It's that fundamental.
Yeah.
So the laws that were changed to make this taking of property, these changes were made over decades, and it is irrefutable that this has been done. And in a way, that is a blessing to us because it's so clear, and it's not going to go away as a kind of proof of what has been done. It's something that people can look at, understand that this is the case. And so a process has begun first off in the state of South Dakota. And a bill was filed on Monday in the state of South Dakota to challenge this and to reverse the law to regain property rights for people in the state of South Dakota to their securities. This is a beginning, perhaps, of something that can then be carried on in other states. And that's beginning to happen as well. Do you agree that this is a vector that could lead to some profound change? How important do you think this effort is that's just beginning in South Dakota now?
David, that's the very reason you and I are here,
Yeah.
is because you know the answer to that question, but the audience doesn't know what my answer to that question is. I'm totally on board with that. I'm very excited. I'm almost as excited about this as you are, because I don't understand it quite as well as you do, but I understand the basics, that this is a fundamental change that is about to be made, and you are the one that stepped up and blew the whistle on it. And that whistle is getting louder and louder. People are blowing their own whistles now. And the crescendo of that shrill sound is getting louder and louder. And I'm greatly excited and encouraged by the possibility, and now maybe edging on the inevitability, that this is going to grow quickly and wildly into a powerful, notice the word,
Yes,
powerful movement.
Yeah.
It'll give us the power to influence legislation and a lot of other things too. But that power will come from this understanding that thank God, you are the one that triggered the whole thing and got it started. So I'm all for it, and I want to just publicly again thank you for doing this.
Well,
count me in. My message is yes, yes, and yes, and count me in.
Yes, yes. Well, I have to say my role in this I have felt that I am just cooperating all along. I don't really feel like it's something that I am doing. I am cooperating in what I see, and then saying something about it, and then it's taken on a life of its own.
Well, I think
And
that's
I'm
a very admirable
facilitating it.
attitude, and it's humble, and it's true. I understand. I feel the same way.
It's
anyway.
much bigger than it's big.
Bigger than
it's
us.
a big,
that's
big
for sure.
thing.
Yes, but you still, nevertheless, are playing a role in it. And if
Well,
everybody
we
would
can.
do as they could,
I mean, that's important. The to know that you really have much more personal power than you know.
yeah, you never know when the spark is going to ignite into something raging across the prairie. Well, how does that phrase go? The spark in the minds of men that causes the prairie fire, or something like that.
Yeah.
It's
Well, it's a bit like I think there are parallels with the first American Revolution in the time that we're going into. There certainly needs to be some kind of a profound change, and I think many people sense that or know it on some level. So I think it's very important for people to know that there are concrete steps that are beginning to be taken in the states. It's very important for people to look into that. This bill to modify the Uniform Commercial Code in South Dakota, and to support that, contact the legislators in South Dakota. This is vital in these next couple of weeks. But even beyond that, awareness of this action can be picked up in other states, and that will continue. But let's say that there's Ed Dowd uses this term force multiplier, which is that one person can't do much of anything. There has to be a multiplier effect, and that happens when other people, it's the prairie fire, other people pick it up, they make it their own, and they are running with it, and that is beginning. It becomes distributed power, and but there. Do you think that people are now coming to some kind of a commonality in terms of their understanding of the problem and their hopes? Are things converging in terms, is there a convergence happening for people now in terms of realizing that there is a problem, maybe starting to understand what the problem is, and a convergence instead of a diffusion and people bickering, people starting to have a convergence in terms of their hope for themselves and humanity, and that is not in conflict, actually?
Well, again, I think it's a self-fulfilling answer that, yeah, it's obvious that this is reaching out to a lot of people, and it's reaching fast, and as it should, because it affects everyone except that very small minority at the top who are going to benefit from all of this. And even those who had great wealth thought they could rise above it because they can buy your way out of almost everything, are realizing no, they're not exempt either. And that so that's causing a rapid awareness and growth in resolve to do something about it. But you touched the real problem when you said, are they becoming aware of the problem, and do they understand the nature of the problem? Those are two different things. Mm-hmm. One of the things I worry most about is that I'm afraid that our opponent, our enemy, let's call him what I think he is, have thought about this a long time ago and have anticipated that there will come a time along the process of their consolidation of power when there'll be waves of pushback, when people will come to this awareness that, hey, we better do something about it. And there'll be this upwelling and this growth in the pushback. And so I put myself in the position of what would I do if I were them, knowing that this was going to happen. And of course, the answer is really clear. It's what the military does when they build strategies for what if. There's nothing that ever happens in the world that the military hasn't already anticipated that, well, what would we do if this happened? I think they have buildings full of strategists who are building scenarios of what you do.
Yes.
You don't have to worry about it at the time. You've already figured it out, maybe even had some practices doing it. So I know for certain in my mind that this upwelling of awareness was anticipated by the opposition. So what would I do if I were sitting around their board table? I would say, well, let's take a look at Plan 7B and pull that out and read it again. Oh, okay, we're going to use that one. And I think that 7B would probably be to, if you can't stop it, then overpower it with some other issue. In other words, let's unleash a world war or let's have an EMP attack that turns off the electricity. Let's have people fighting and rioting in the streets over something. Let's do something really dramatic. Let's drop an atomic bomb on Cincinnati. And now that'll do it, because everybody will say, oh my gosh, we're in an atomic war. We're not going to worry about property rights. We're worried about surviving now. That's what I would do. And I'm going to throw it out for what it's worth, because our enemy is of that nature. They would do anything to preserve their power and perpetuate it. So if we pretend like we don't know that, we're making a big mistake.
Sure.
Now, the rest of that story is, even though that were not part of the picture, people are becoming aware that this is a threat on their private property, and they're upset. But do they understand why they're after their private property? Is it just because they want the property and it's selfish? Or is there an ideological reason? And of course, there's an ideological reason as well.
Yeah.
And what I'm not seeing, and I think it's one of my responsibilities, is to help people realize that there's something else even bigger that encompasses that. And that's this ideology of collectivism, which is at the root of everything. If you peel back the onion layers enough, you see, oh, it's this ideology called collectivism. The idea that the group is more important than the individual, and that the individual must be sacrificed, if necessary, for the greater good of the greater number. That's the core of it. And all of these atrocities that are being committed are done on the basis of that justification. It's for the greater good. Or you've got to take that vaccine because it's not for you, but for your grandmother, or something like that. The greater good of society. It's always that. We'll have this war because if we don't have the war, well, it might be even worse. And on and on and on. So I want people to understand that the enemy really is not just this guy that's trying to take your property rights because he's a dirty son of a gun, and get rid of him and replace him with somebody you can trust. Yes. No, you got to look at their deeper motives. Are these collectivists? Are these ideologically motivated people? And they are. In every case that I've had a chance to look at the movers and shakers of this opposition that we're talking about, yes, they believe intensely in the principles of collectivism, and that is what motivates them.
And to be clear, these are the people controlling the central banks.
They are yeah. And they're also the people who created that ideology in the first place.
Yes, so they are not what we would really think of as capitalists.
No, they're the opposite.
Yes.
No, they're not capitalists. They may be very rich, but that's not the definition of capitalism.
Yes.
The richest people in the world are the despots.
So coming back to what you've just said, that this is rushing towards something now. And the people behind this we seem to be going into an intensifying hybrid war globally. And people would say, well, when is that beginning? Well, you're in it already. You have hundreds of thousands of innocent people that have been killed in Ukraine at this point, that have been trapped in the middle of this. You have the horrible destruction in Gaza going on presently. This is on the heels of years of the bizarre things that happened during COVID, and it may be a long time before we understand what all the objectives were of that opening stage.
But we already see the casualties.
So we're in it big time, and so there's an urgency to understand what is behind it, and that it is going to get worse. And
also, the other thing I mentioned and didn't fully develop is the fact that knowing that there would be a pushback, another part of the strategy of our opponent would be to provide leadership for the pushback. Actors, controlled opposition. They know that we will be looking for people to rise up and lead against them. So they don't wait around and say, let's see, I wonder who they're going to choose. They put their own man or woman out there. And he says all the right things. He says, follow me, we'll get rid of these dirty bankers, we'll solve this problem. And people say, well, thank God, and they'll follow them. But they're programmed to be defeated. Now, that's something people don't like to think about. Oh, they wouldn't do that, would they? Well, of course they would. This is war. They would do that on a heartbeat. They do that on the football field with the Statue of Liberty play. Why wouldn't they do it in warfare, for gosh sake?
Yes. But if they're, a time where there is suffering and people are under threat, people are changed by that. Obviously, it's something you would never wish upon yourself or anyone else, but something happens through a time like that, and people develop conviction, and so the more threatening the situation gets, there's an initial period of just fear, not being able to face up to things, but then eventually people individually start really facing up to things. And if that can, someone said, that of course many people are shut down by being overwhelmed with conflicting information. They can't make sense of things. But once people begin to see differently what is happening, they have passed through the membrane to the right side of the membrane, and they do not go back. They are just accumulating the number of people that have had this experience of, they may not understand, none of us understand everything.
Well, that's for certain, yeah.
But so if that is happening, and there could be a rapid societal change over a period of a few years. So the World Economic Forum plan is to have a whole different world by the end of this decade, 2030. Humanity's plan, of course, has to be to have some alternative version. Things are going to change, but to do something different. So if it would seem that it is imperative to cut off the funding to all of this myriad of psyops and all kinds of things that are focused on hurting people, really. It's as simple as that. To stop the funding, if we could develop a resolve to end central bank control somewhere in the world, and that could start. It has to begin that way.
Oh, it has to begin that way. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm in total agreement. But I keep coming back to that. How do we do that? And we have to have power to do that. Not just, it's easy to say we must do this somehow, but it's the somehow.
Well, it has to come from the state level or from the national level.
It has to work up. That means it comes up from the community levels.
Yes.
You've got to have people right here in your county that there are 120 people that you could call on the phone, and you said we got an important thing to accomplish at a meeting tomorrow night.
Yes.
They'll be there.
Yes. But it can also proceed in parallel,
all
over.
All over, yeah. I'm not talking about one county.
Yes.
I'm talking about all of them.
That's what has to happen, is that it is happening in parallel in many places at the same time.
Yes, and that means there has to be some kind of coordination and direction, but it cannot be authoritative. It has to be voluntary.
Well, there's a model. People see something that has worked, and they can then be inspired by that.
Yeah, this is how we did it.
Yes.
Wouldn't you like to try it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what they're trying to do in South Dakota right now.
Wow.
And
we should do everything possible to support that.
It's very exciting. So let's say things could change at the state level, and then a change could be forced at the congressional level. And they're over a period of just a few years here, there's a massive social shift to end the Federal Reserve Act and replace it with something else. Many people, the Stockholm Syndrome is, well, everything would collapse if you did that. If you ended the Federal Reserve, we couldn't do that because this is what they want you to believe. You can't, you need us. Things would be bad if. So help people to understand that if that could happen, well, let me ask, if you had the authority to do that, to end the Federal Reserve System, how would you do it? Is there a way to do it that there would not be a collapse and that actually everything could get better essentially immediately?
Well, my answer to that one is that I do not know of any way to unwind this problem as deep and as tight as it is now without paying some pretty serious prices for it. Some great discomfort, pain, agony. I think the best analogy is would be a drug addict trying to kick the habit. Serious drug addict. If you cold turkey it, he'll probably die. It would destroy him. I've heard that that's the case in many cases. So you have to ease off in some way. Well, you don't have to, but I mean, it could be very destructive. But the point is, everybody's looking for the painless solution, and there's no painless solution. We've gone so far that it's going to be painful no matter what.
Well, but okay, let's say that if you have a business that is not working, it's losing money, one way to fix that is that you stop doing the things that aren't working. you stop doing the things that are not working and start doing the things that are. Focus on those things. And we're in a situation where much of what is being done is actually hurting people and hurting the economy. And I would like to think that there's potential that if you just have a different means of control of this system, so that the things that are hurting people are just cease, there's an immediate relief from that for people. Does that make any sense?
I would like to think that too, but I don't think that at all. I think that let's be specific. We're talking about the Federal Reserve System.
Yeah,
and
but
central banking in
But
general.
the Federal Reserve is also funding lots of things, and indirectly
makes it possible. So how do you straighten out the Federal Reserve System and make it a beneficial institution? I don't think it's possible because it wasn't designed to be a beneficial institution.
No, it wasn't.
It was designed to be an instrument of plunder.
Yes.
And how do you take I don't know an analogy? How do you take a gun and convert it into a cow or something?
Well,
like
okay, there's a transition period. All I'm suggesting is initially it's better just because you see the next day that let's say the violence starts to end. You know, things like that, different programs that are hurting people just stop. You could have something like ending the taxation system, which is mainly a way of harassing people and taking resources from them. You know, people can talk about what would replace that, but there can be a kind of a series of things that can be done that can make things better quickly. But in terms of the Federal Reserve, yes, there would need to be a transition. And one idea, Bill Still in his piece, The Money Masters, he talks about the idea that the Treasury would just issue money to repay the Federal Reserve-based debt as it comes due or more aggressively, and that could be a transition period where at least there's no longer interest being paid into the Federal Reserve on that debt. Now you essentially, one hand is redeeming the debt and the other is issuing currency to replace that. Does that make sense as a
Well, it doesn't
step?
to me. I understand the motive behind it is to try and make this thing work, to avoid as much agony and destruction as possible. But I think, I'm quite familiar with Bill's work, and he's always been an advocate of fiat currency.
Yeah.
And to me, it makes no difference whether the scam is operated by private banks or by the government. It's still a scam. And I don't care who participates in fractional reserve banking, whether it's the government or bankers. I don't care who makes money out of nothing, whether it's the government or the bankers. It's the fact that somebody's making money out of nothing and charging interest on it. I don't care who it is. I don't think the private sector is any more untrustworthy than the government sector. So that's why, first of all, I reject that whole idea, because it doesn't really change anything. But many people would say, that'll do it. It's the dirty bankers, you know.
Yeah.
We just take away that interest that we're paying to them, it'll all be okay. And no, it won't. The interest, first of all, is not the major factor. The interest that the government pays to the Federal Reserve, as you know, I'm sure, is much of it is refunded. Most of it is refunded, because the Federal Reserve keeps only what it needs for its own operating expense, which is a lot. I don't know what the number is. It's a huge amount. It's a
nice deal. All their expenses are covered.
Yeah, but whatever it is, it's not the total for sure, and a lot of it is refunded. But that's not where the danger lies. It's much bigger than that. I would gladly pay the interest on that if it served a productive function, you know, a beneficial function. So I don't see that as a solution at all. I think we have to bite the bullet and say the dope is the problem of the addiction. It's not who's selling the dope, but
it is a problem. Who is going to control it? Is it possible that governments are so corrupt and unresponsive to the interests of the public because of the money power that controls everything? So if that is stopped, this is one of the things that could get better immediately, that people in government and even universities, even academia could get past their money incentives to do what they're told to do, and people could start doing things for the right reasons.
Well, my answer is that I don't think it would work, because I think people won't start doing the right thing for the right reasons, because they could do that now, but you were saying they don't have the money to do it. Well, then they're not going to have the money anyway if we reform the system. So those things, they're not interested in doing the right things. Let's start with that. That's not why they're there. They have other fish to fry. They want to look like they're doing the right thing, but what they're doing right now is what they want to do, and they want to continue that. Anyway, I just don't see, as long as we condone the evil practice and just say, let's find out a better way to do the wrong thing, we're not moving in the right direction.
Well, but if the money power that, let's go back to the Founding Fathers, when you had a finite money system just based on metals, and all the government was doing was fixing weights and measures, and so there wasn't a banking power controlling the government at that point. Now it's not perfect. It is a free-for-all. It's always a free-for-all. But isn't that what we're trying to get back to? It's that kind of a free-for-all where there's distributed power, there isn't a money power controlling the government. You have to have a government. There's always I know what you're saying, that you want a protectorate.
Yes.
You want a protectorate. It's a matter of what does that term mean?
Yeah.
But isn't, if the money power is stopped, can't the government or protectorate begin to function properly?
Only if good people were in it. Only if you had honest people in legislature, which we don't have right now.
Well, but they've been drawn there by the corrupt money power.
Yeah, but they're there. How do we get rid of them?
That I guess implicit to me is all those people would be gone because they're no longer being paid.
They'll be paid. I mean, are you suggesting we leave the Federal Reserve in place?
No, no. I'm saying that the control of the Federal Reserve ends.
Well,
So
what's the control of the Federal Reserve?
it is there would have to be, okay, the Federal Reserve would not continue, to be clear. You end the Federal Reserve Act, but you still have all of the infrastructure that is there. Day one, you still have the infrastructure that has been created around this. And you need a transition period to move that toward, perhaps it can then be moved toward a finite money system. But it seems to me that when I say that the control group would be gone day one. It's like when you have the CEO of a company that is running amok, and the board, in this case the public, says, you're relieved of your position. You can go to the beach now. You're done. That would be the case with the people behind this. Now, I know you're saying they're not going to do that.
Well, the people have no control over the Fed at all. They're not the stockholders.
That's why you would have to get to the point of actually through the Congress. I know it seems hard to imagine that it could happen.
Well, I understand where you're going, and I'm sympathetic with the goal, and I've thought about it a lot, but I've just come to the conclusion that this is a totally corrupt system. It was designed to be totally corrupt,
yes.
And I don't think you can change it. I think what we must do is just abolish it.
Yes.
And now there's a lot to be said if there's a way to abolish it slowly, so that the impact is not all at once. It would be very hard. It's like an addict going off cold turkey.
Yes.
And it could be more than the country could bear. I acknowledge that. Maybe there's a way to ease out of it. But,
well, there are things like, Lincoln's greenbacks. They're as you've recounted the whole history of that. There are things that we're in a war. We're in a war. There are things that you do to save the society, and then health can return so that the debt can be paid off. It can be transitioned to something.
Well, it's theoretically possible, but I don't think there's much historical evidence of those things actually happening. They're usually offered as an excuse for delay and more time to recoup and continue the war. But I'm all for if it could be done, I would say, yeah, I'd probably reluctantly go along with it. Yeah. But I just don't see it happening. And I'm not very optimistic about finding a group of good men who will be able to resist the temptation of money and power.
Well, that's why it needs to be distributed. But the ideas the founding fathers had of it being a finite money, metals-based system, I mean, what I'm imagining is that we don't have to go back to, carrying, lumps of metal around. The electronic payment system is a good thing.
Well, if you could eliminate the third-party risk.
Okay, this is what I'm imagining, that the Fed notes that the Treasury basically issues the money to repay the debt as it comes due, so you don't have to have an implosion. But then that Treasury-based debt becomes backed by silver. I'm gearing off of your ideas. Silver, gold can be a secondary metal as a monetary asset, but it floats to the silver. You still have the payment structure, so you have depositories for the metal that are exchangeable into. They can be transferred electronically. They could be used with a certificate, but there's 100% backing. And then you go to a tax, a very small transaction tax on electronic transfers for the convenience, something like 0.1%. So there's no need for income tax. And so you have a metals-based backing, and it runs based on a totally transparent, understandable, fee-based system.
Well, I'm getting the picture. All of these ideas, I think, have a lot of merit, but none of them can come to fruition until Congress is completely changed.
Oh yeah, it would have to turn over completely.
And it won't turn over as long as the Fed exists producing the money. So
it's a chicken
sort of
and egg
chicken
problem.
and eggs problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got to reform the system before you can reform the system.
But there's no alternative.
There is, but it's ugly. But at least it's possible. Just abolish the Federal Reserve.
Well,
now, just abolish it. Okay,
yes.
It's gone.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be replaced with anything.
Okay.
When you have cancer, you don't say, well, what would you replace it with?
Another cancer.
Another cancer, no.
So how would that look? How would that play? How could, let's just say as a given that there has been such distress in the society over a period of a few years that there is mass participation in there needs to be a change. And there is a convergence of understanding that it has to happen. Let's assume that something like that is going to happen.
Well, okay, if you assume that, I'm a little bit frightened by it because I think the public would snap at the first thing that's offered. And that might be Bill Still's proposal. Trust the government. Turn this whole thing over. The same operation, just move it Treasury only. Get the private bankers out of it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Everything continues otherwise the same, like the Bank of England. Okay. It's the same in England as it is here in the U.S.
Yeah.
It's just that we have the two identities instead of one. Private versus public.
Well, we could understand I think people are coming to understand that there doesn't need to be a fiat-based system. It can be moved to being backed, but you still need electronic payments for society to function. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's
nothing wrong with that.
So
there's a certain risk involved with
the system.
But
we keep the infrastructure we have, but yes, the Fed would cease to exist. It has been. I think we're in agreement on that.
It has to cease to exist.
It seems to be a human imperative now. And if it can happen, if that happened with the Fed, the entire world will change.
Well, the forces that be would not allow that to happen without great resistance.
Yes.
And it'd be like Biddle when he tried to keep the last bank of the U.S. alive.
But they did it.
But Jackson did that.
Yeah.
But Jackson was almost run out on a rail.
Yes.
It hadn't been for some accidental disclosures that went public.
Yes.
But had that not happened, the public would have blamed Jackson for all the hardships that were happening.
Yes.
And Jackson would have been run out on a rail.
Yeah.
And that, I think right now with the control they have over the media, there's no question that an honest effort to remove the Fed would be labeled as the cause of all the problems that were happening. And they would probably add some more to the list that didn't happen. And the public would fall for it. That's the problem.
Well, maybe right now.
Right now, yeah.
Right now. But what about after another 2 or 3 years of escalating hybrid war and hardship?
Okay, now we can talk.
Yeah.
So something has to happen in those couple of years. We have to become more powerful. We have to have more power, more influence over public opinion. Because that's where it all starts, a public opinion. If the masses, even though they're not going to participate in the reform, they have to go along with it. They have to support it at some level.
Yes.
Otherwise, they'll be too easily motivated, and there'll be, the citizen firing squads out there. They'll be out looking for people like us, thinking that we caused the problem.
Yeah.
And so we got to have the masses understanding at some fundamental level that what we're doing is good and worth the pain.
Yes.
Worth
But
the pain.
I'm gearing off of, I agree with you completely about the 3%. It's just a small percentage of people that need to start having a kind of convergence of understanding of what needs to be done. And then it's not everybody that needs to understand it, certainly.
Not everybody has to understand it, but
Yeah.
the larger group has to respond to the slogans. They have to understand it at a slogan level, I think, which is enough. That's powerful. If you can get people to respond to a slogan like "Stop it."
Yes.
Now we're talking about reaching the masses at some gut level.
Yes.
Anyway, that's my thought. I could easily be wrong. This is uncharted territory, as you
it is.
correctly
Yes.
pointed out. Yeah.
Yes.
Never a challenge like this has never arisen, I don't think, in history. It's so profound. I mean, involving so many psychological components to it.
Yes.
It's always been pretty much militaristic and economic, but now it's psychology.
Yes. And I think, and many other people are saying it is spiritual now because there's no alternative. You can't avoid it now because, and what do I mean by that? It's that it's something that is so difficult and really horrible to face up to that it's necessary to transcend that somehow. You can't hide from it.
No.
You have to, so the spiritual part of it is some kind of an acceptance of what it is and being able to somehow pass through that to something else.
Yeah, well, I guess I can't think of the saying, but I know what the impact of the saying is, that when you get close to death, you will become more religious or something like that. Well, there's another saying like a Chinese person who converted to Christianity never dies, because as he gets close to death, he goes back to his Buddhism or something like that. Something like that, And then, I guess that's true. Your ingrained beliefs for most of your life come to the fore when there's great trauma, great trouble. When you think you're facing death, everybody says, God, are we in touch with each other now? I know I haven't talked to you lately, but that sort of is common. And then you start thinking about the hereafter and those things that you didn't have time for when you were young and healthy.
Yeah. Well, I think that we've been in a time of where societally it's been rather narcissistic. The figures that are all held up as role models for us, that's what it's about. And what passes for morality is that you should take care of number one, and as they say, don't be a floor mat, look after yourself, as if that's the first thing to do.
Well, there's some merit to that. You can't take care of others until you are solid yourself.
Yes.
On that basis, there's some merit to that.
Well, sure.
But that's not to exclude everything else.
Yeah, there's of course there's a basis for it, but societally, it is these things, the narcissism and the self-focus. It has reached a kind of extreme. It's a sick society where people don't well, as I say, most people, they can't accept their own death because the whole universe revolves around their persona, you know.
That's all there is.
And it's clearly not, I think that's actually a kind of insanity, that the whole world, the whole universe revolves around any individual. Any of us should be able to see that isn't the case.
I would think
and
so.
that then there's a shift that can occur where people realize that they don't end at their own skin. They actually are part of something much bigger than themselves. And there's something really powerful in that, to break out of this very kind of distorted self-focus and the anxiety around the self into being part of something much bigger.
Well, you know, David, I sort of went through that myself. I might have mentioned this to you earlier when I first got my first red pill. Prior to that time, I'm a young guy. I'm just freshly married, got a wife, and a baby to support, and I was totally materialistic and self-centered and all about me and my family, and the world didn't matter. And then I realized that, wait a minute, the future wasn't as secure as I thought, and it got me to thinking about maybe I had to do something about it.
Yes.
And that was the pivotal point right there, that I realized I had to do something about it.
Yes.
So that's, I think, what you're talking about.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. You did that. You had that shift a long time ago.
Yeah. But
I guess what I'm pointing to is that can happen societally.
Yes.
And
let's hope it does.
That's what I mean by this going into a spiritual period. It's that kind of a shift for people, and it only comes about with some difficulty for people.
How sad, but true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're going to get it.
So, one way or the other.
So these shifts will happen for people.
Yeah.
And it will be a societal shift as well.
Okay. Well, I love these issues. Some of these are hard to answer. It's hard for me to say, I haven't the foggiest idea what the answer to that question is.
Yeah.
But in most cases, that's the truth.
Yes. It's we'll see.
We'll get to experiment and to play with the idea, and somebody will along the line will drop an idea on us, and we'll go, gee, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
And that'll be one more piece in place in the puzzle.
Yeah.
And now we're all motivated to put the puzzle together and solve the mystery.
Yeah.
And we will do it.
Yeah. Anyway, Ed, thank you so much. It's been a great honor to be here with you in your home and to be able to have a conversation like this.
It's joyous.
And the other conversations we've had.
Yeah. Well, I hope we will do it many more times, David.
Yes.
And thanks to you, I got to repeat it one more time, for your pivotal role in starting this ball rolling. This is a big, big change that you have started, and I know you're very humble about it. But I know a lot of people could have started it, but you did, so that's good.
No.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ed. And I think you started it. quite a while
Wait a minute!
ago.
Don't blame me for this.
We could argue about who started.
Then we have to accept responsibility for it. Oh no!
Right.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye bye.